Our reading this morning comes from the 11th chapter of John's Gospel. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who were with him also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it, and Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the gospel of the Lord. Beloved of God, grace to you and peace from the one who created us, redeemed us, and moves among us still. Amen. My friend and colleague, the now retired Pastor Heidi Neumark, wrote a really remarkable essay about this passage from John's Gospel way back in 2012. And it was one of those pieces of writing that stuck with me, first of all, just for the beauty and the power of it by itself, but also for some of the ways that it intersected with some of the pieces of my own family story. So it's one of those things that I've held on to and have read probably a half a dozen times over the years. And I read it again this week in anticipation of what is a tender day here in worship as we remember and call into our hearts those we have loved who have died. And it's been a tender day, tender week really for many of us at Grace and for the pastoral team as we learned just a couple of days ago of Grace Lawson's death. She was a longtime member here at Grace. And as we have been making some very tender hospital visits this week with elderly saints in our congregation, and then of course as we welcome new saints in the faith like Emma, there just has been such a poignancy about all of that. And I read her reflection also knowing that we are on the precipice of what will almost certainly be a very anxious and chaotic week in our country, regardless of who you vote for or whether you vote or what you think about politics in general. There's a lot coming at us. And I know that the kind of rhetoric that's been part of so much of our political discourse in this last campaign cycle has been hard for some of the most vulnerable among us. I think especially of the family that is staying in our parsonage who have shared with me the anxiety and the fear that they feel about the way that immigration has been part of our political discourse. And so I ask your prayers in particular for that family and folks like them in Chicagoland and across the country who are living with that sort of concern. And so I share all of this because this essay that I read of my friend and colleague, Pastor Neumark, when I read it again this week, actually healed something in my heart this week. And so I've chosen today to share her essay with you, trusting the Spirit's nudging that it might heal something in you as well. Pastor Neumark writes this: "To understand what I'm going to tell you, you need to know that my parents were scientists and that my mother's mind had a decidedly unpoetic bent. Nonetheless, they read me poems from the time I was very young because they paid attention to what gladdened my spirit. Near the end of my mother's life, such gladness was mostly a thing of the past. She was living with us as we tried inadequately to cope with the ravages of Parkinson's disease. Her conversation took strange turns. Although her legs barely moved, her brain bundled her off on hallucinogenic journeys. Thankfully, she always came back and knew who we were. In fact, I regret that at times she saw all too clearly how stressed out I was. "Are you writing?" friends would ask me. "Are you crazy?" I felt like yelling. In the final weeks, my mother made a peculiar request. She ripped a page from a magazine she was paging through. She could no longer read much, but she turned the pages, and then she asked Ora, the woman who helped us care for her, to tape the page to my bedroom door, up the 2 flights of stairs she could no longer manage. Ora told me this, indicating that it made no sense, but she did it because of my mother's insistence. The ad my mother had torn out was for diamond earrings. Ora knew that I don't have pierced ears or crave expensive jewelry. I climbed the stairs and stood at the door like Martha at the mouth of the tomb, expecting to find nothing except further evidence of a loved one's deterioration. There it was, the ad for diamond earrings. But I saw instantly that it wasn't about the jewelry. Below the diamonds, I read the shining letters, "Become a poet." A brilliant message on the threshold of death. You, beloved jewel of my heart, be who you are called to be. Do what you are called to do. It was my mother's final gift to me. The message was for me, but I think it reaches further. We are all called to create in the face of death, to spend our energies not in pursuit of expensive jewelry or other costly goods, but in multiplying good, following whatever path is right for us, even when it's hard, even when we have to struggle through weakness of body and mind, and enlist the help of others, as my mother did, to get that living word on the door. Many churches will be marking All Saints on Sunday, November 4th, 2012. We will light candles in memory of loved ones whom we hold dear. We will join in prayer as we gather on the threshold of a presidential election. The lighting of candles catches us up in private memories and emotions, while the upcoming election takes place on a public stage. As Jesus comes to Lazarus' tomb, his living word addresses the range of our losses and longings. Jesus weeps over the loss of his friend, but sadness is not the only emotion in the story. There's also a lot of anger. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," cries Martha, soon joined by the angry echo of her sister. Even the neighbors wonder why Jesus didn't do more. Here is room for the ragged edges of our real feelings and questions. Too much room for some tastes. Mary and Martha are permitted their anger, but Jesus is not. We hear that Jesus was greatly disturbed in spirit, but the original Greek states that he was boiling mad. Our translators have massaged Jesus' words like the handlers of a candidate who goes off script. When the early church fathers commented on the story of Lazarus, they wrote that Jesus was angry at Satan, angry at the power of evil. "My rage is a cloud of flame," wrote the poet Marge Piercy. "A good anger acted upon is beautiful as lightning and swift with power. A good anger swallowed clots the blood to slime." When we lose the anger, we also miss the connection between the two stories John tells, in which good anger becomes the impetus for challenge and change. It was in the temple when Jesus saw the money changers defrauding the poor that his anger flamed, and he picked up a whip to chase the cheaters away. As Jesus stands before Lazarus' tomb, he has come to the temple again. Only this time it is the temple of Lazarus' body, being robbed of health and cheated of life. Jesus' handlers may have wanted him to swallow his anger, but Jesus acted on it, beautiful as lightning and swift with power. Take away the stone, he orders. It's too late, protests Martha. By now, there will be a stink. There is a stink. If our TV sets were equipped with smell-o-vision, we would be hit by the stench of campaign ads. The cowardice and corruption and cruelty of many leaders stinks. A national landscape littered with the corpses of our highest ideals stinks. Parkinson's disease stinks. The death of our loved ones stinks. Some will believe with Martha that it's too late. Why bother? I made the same mistake on the threshold of my mother's death, weary at the thought of climbing the stairs. I forgot the power of one who is able to call forth unforeseen possibilities, the healing of the nations, the wiping away of tears, the swallowing up of death. Jesus stands with us in the face of all that stinks. Come forth, he says, to pray, to sing, to vote, to labor, to love. Beloved jewels of my heart, come forth. Amen.